thank you to everyone who took the time to listen. The chosen ones are often targeted not for their flaws, but because their light exposes hidden darkness in others. This truth has repeated itself throughout history. It's not uncommon for those who walk in integrity, purpose, and spiritual clarity to become magnets for criticism, betrayal, and even attacks. People often claim to desire truth, but when it shows up wrapped in purity and boldness, it confronts the comfortable lies they've built their lives upon. That confrontation is threatening, so instead of self-reflecting or seeking growth, they lash out at the very person who embodied the truth they needed. The chosen one's mere existence shines a mirror back at those still living in shadows, and that mirror is too honest, too raw, too revealing, so they break the mirror rather than look into it. And that's where the persecution begins, and not because of wrongdoing, but because of righteousness. It isn't the crime of evil that draws attention to the chosen ones, it's the presence of goodness that cannot be controlled, manipulated, or bought. When people carry unhealed wounds, unresolved guilt, and hidden jealousy, they are easily triggered by someone who walks in alignment. The light of the chosen one disturbs the demons in others. It exposes the areas they've tried to hide, the hypocrisy they've tried to mask, and the intentions they've covered with sweet words and false kindness. The chosen ones never have to speak much. Their presence alone brings things to the surface, and in that exposure, people begin to project. They start saying things like, "You think you're better than everyone," or "You're too intense," or "Why are you always so different?" These comments aren't based on anything the chosen one has done. They stem from the insecurity and conviction that others feel in their presence. When someone's life is anchored in authenticity, it threatens those still living in pretense. When someone's joy is pure and unshakable, it unsettles those who rely on validation. When someone walks in divine favor, it reminds others that their shortcuts and schemes still left them empty. The darkness in others doesn't always look like malice. Sometimes it looks like people who smile to your face but gossip about you the moment you leave the room. It looks like passive aggression, subtle sabotage, and emotional manipulation. It looks like people questioning your motives, spinning your words, and twisting your actions to paint you as the villain. And yet, you did nothing wrong. That's the painful irony. The very people who cry out for justice are the ones who commit injustice behind closed doors. The very ones who preach kindness are the ones who silently celebrate your downfall. It becomes clear that your presence, your voice, your light, it's too much for them. Not because you're flawed, but because you're real. You're chosen, and chosen doesn't mean perfect. It means appointed, marked, set apart for something greater than yourself. That mark comes with the weight, and the attacks you face are not random. They are spiritual, strategic, and often come when you're on the edge of breakthrough. There's a reason they come after you when you're getting stronger. There's a reason they try to isolate you when you're finding your voice. There's a reason they try to label you when you're becoming clearer about your identity. These attacks are attempts to dim your light before it blinds the lies others are clinging to. The truth is, many people are comfortable in their dysfunction. They've decorated their pain, normalized their toxic cycles, and built entire identities around their suffering. So when someone like you walks in a healed, whole, or even just on the path to wholeness, it confronts the idea that healing is possible, that change is real, and that they are not victims of circumstance forever. That confrontation is too much for them to bear. It disrupts the narrative that they've repeated to themselves for years. So instead of embracing the inspiration and allowing it to push them forward, they reject the messenger. They fight the light bearer. They crucify the innocent. In their minds, silencing you is easier than changing themselves. Dismissing you is more comfortable than digging into their own soul. If they can mock you, discredit you, or make others question your intentions, they feel safer. Because if people believe you, then the pressure shifts to them. They'll have to face the fact that they haven't done the inner work, that they've ignored the call, that they've been living a lie. And pride doesn't let go easily. Ego will sacrifice anyone who threatens its throne. So they call you names. They bring up your past. They highlight your humanity. They wait for you to make a mistake so they can finally say, "See, I told you they're not special." But they never say that about people who don't carry weight. They don't attack those who are going nowhere. The opposition is confirmation. The friction is evidence. Your life irritates them because you're doing something right. You're a walking contradiction to everything they've accepted as normal. You're proof that it's possible to be unbothered in chaos, peaceful in pain, and hopeful in uncertainty. That kind of power can't be taught. It's divine. It's chosen. And people fear what they cannot control, so they create narratives around you. They try to manage your image, distort your story, or box you into roles that make them feel more comfortable. But you keep rising, you keep loving, you keep glowing, because your light doesn't come from aim up, it comes from a higher source, one that doesn't need their approval. And that is the most dangerous thing to those who operate in performance. Your authenticity, your purpose, your calling, it exposes the hollowness in their applause-seeking lifestyles. They need validation to feel valuable. You don't. They need a crowd to feel seen. You're comfortable in the wilderness. They follow trends. You follow God. And that's what makes you different. That's what makes you a threat. That's why the attacks are so personal, so relentless, so confusing. You didn't do anything to them. You simply became who you were always meant to be. And in doing so, you exposed who they were pretending to be. False accusations and attacks against the innocent reveal the fear and guilt of those operating in deception. When someone is truly innocent, when their heart is clean, their intentions pure, and their actions aligned with truth, any attempt to tarnish their character is less about them and more about the inner turmoil of those pointing the finger. People who are bound by lies, who have built facades to hide their insecurities, often feel exposed in the presence of authenticity. Rather than confront the parts of themselves they've hidden away, they shift focus outward. They target those who reflect the truth they're unwilling to face. The attacks don't originate from justice or truth, they are projections. Accusations become a weapon for the guilty to soothe their own conscience, to redirect attention, and to preserve the illusion of moral superiority. The innocent, in turn, become scapegoats, unjustly accused, ridiculed, and often punished not for what they did, but for what others are trying to hide. This pattern plays out in both personal and public arenas. In families, it may be the one who speaks up about abuse or manipulation that becomes labeled as the problem. In friendships, it might be the honest one who is alienated, the loyal one who is painted as disloyal, the quiet one who is misunderstood. In society, whistleblowers, truth-tellers, and visionaries are often met with suspicion and opposition before they are ever met with support. Those operating in deception live in fear of being found out. They are constantly guarding the cracks in their stories, patching up lies with new ones, manipulating perception to keep the truth buried. When someone walks in truth, that entire fragile structure begins to crumble. It terrifies them, not because the truth teller is dangerous, but because the truth itself has the power to dismantle what they've worked so hard to protect. This fear is not always conscious. Some people are so embedded in their own deception that they truly believe the lies they've constructed. When confronted with someone who carries clarity, discernment, and peace, it disrupts their false sense of security. So they react, they label, they accuse, they frame narratives that allow them to remain the victim or the hero in the story. The real threat isn't the accused, it's the possibility that people will begin to see through the masks. That's when panic sets in. That's when smear campaigns begin, subtle gossip spreads, and false stories are spun. The louder they speak against the innocent, the more they hope no one will look close enough to see the truth, because truth, once seen, can't be unseen. And once it spreads, it liberates others from the lies they were told to believe. The most disturbing part is how often people believe the lies without question. The world is conditioned to follow voices of influence rather than voices of integrity. If someone speaks with confidence, they are assumed to be right. If someone has a platform, their narrative is assumed to be the dominant one. Meanwhile, the innocent are often soft-spoken, still processing, still in shock that they are even under attack. They're trying to defend themselves while carrying wounds. They're searching for words while being publicly torn apart. And yet, somehow, the mob believes the aggressor. That's the cruelty of deception. It doesn't just twist the truth, it parades lies as justice. It convinces others that wrong is right and that the real victim is the villain. In a world like this, innocence is a dangerous thing to carry, because it stands in defiance of manipulation. It refuses to play the game. It doesn't retaliate with venom. It simply exists in its pure form, and that alone is enough to drive the deceptive into a frenzy. What's even more painful is when those closest to the innocent person are swayed by the accusations. Friends turn cold. Family members grow distant. People who once claimed to support you now treat you with suspicion. This emotional abandonment deepens the wound. It feels like betrayal on top of betrayal. Not only are lies being told about you, but the people you loved most are beginning to believe them. It becomes a lonely place. You're isolated not because of anything you did, but because others were too afraid to stand in this fire with you. They didn't want to risk their own image, so they stayed silent or chose the easier path of alignment with the majority. That silence speaks louder than words, and the innocent person, still processing the injustice, still trying to heal, is forced to walk that road alone. But even in the midst of that loneliness, there's clarity. There's a sacred understanding that emerges when you realize the attacks are not proof of your guilt but of your impact. You begin to see how your presence disturbed hidden agendas, how your honesty shook foundations built on lies, how your purity triggered those still bound in shame. And you begin to understand that what you're facing is spiritual. It's a deeper battle than what is seen. You're not just fighting false words, you're fighting systems of deception that have operated unchecked for too long. And though it hurts, though it feels unfair, you begin to see that this is not punishment. It's evidence that you carry something powerful, something pure, something that forces darkness into the open. Deception can't coexist peacefully with truth, so it tries to eliminate it. That's why those operating in lies must silence the innocent. They must discredit them, destroy their name, assassinate their character, and strip them of support. Because if the innocent are believed, then the deceivers will be exposed, and they can't allow that, so they escalate. What started as whispers becomes shouts. What began as suspicion becomes public condemnation. The innocent find themselves in a battle they never asked for, fighting accusations that seem to multiply. It's exhausting. It's disorienting. It feels like being caught in a storm without warning. But within that storm is revelation. You start to see who's who. You start to recognize motives. You begin to discern the difference between those who love you and those who love the idea of you, between those who walk in truth and those who only wear it as a mask, between those who stand for what's right and those who stand where it's safe. And in that painful clarity, a shift begins. The innocent begin to rise, not by force, but by truth itself. Public outrage is rising as truth comes to light. What was done in secret is now provoking justice and awakening. For so long, the innocent have suffered in silence while lies were elevated, while deception was dressed in charisma, and while manipulation sat on a throne built with influence and fear. But silence has an expiration date when injustice continues to grow louder. The truth, even when buried under layers of false narratives and distorted perceptions, has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. What was whispered in the shadows is now echoing through the public square. The cries of the mistreated, the falsely accused, the betrayed, and the cast aside are no longer being ignored. People are beginning to feel the weight of what they once overlooked. They are awakening to the reality that their silence may have contributed to the oppression, and their passivity gave permission to those who abused their power. There's something sacred about the collective conscience being stirred. It doesn't happen all at once, but it builds over time, as more and more people begin to sense that something isn't right. They begin to question what they were told. They start seeing through the polished words and curated images. They start noticing the inconsistencies in the stories that once seemed so convincing. And in that slow realization, outrage begins to boil. It's not the outrage of blind emotion, it's the righteous anger that rises when people realize they were complicit in a lie, when they understand that someone was harmed not because they were guilty but because they were vulnerable. That kind of fury isn't fleeting. It becomes a catalyst for change, for advocacy, for confrontation of the systems and individuals who have hidden behind manipulation for too long. The awakening isn't just about justice for the innocent, it's about reckoning for those who allowed the attacks to happen. The people who sat silently while rumors spread, the ones who nodded in agreement without facts, the ones who chose to stay neutral while watching someone be torn apart. That neutrality is being challenged. In this awakening, people are realizing that silence in the face of injustice is a position. It speaks just as loudly as an accusation. And now, as the truth rises, so does the collective accountability. There is a growing realization that justice doesn't begin with courts or headlines. It begins in the hearts of people who refuse to ignore evil, even when it's dressed in charm or authority. The fear that once kept people quiet is being replaced with conviction. The pressure to conform is losing its grip as more voices rise in defense of truth. The very person who was once mocked, shunned, or labeled is now being seen through a different lens. People are revisiting what they heard, rethinking what they believed, and recognizing the courage it took for that innocent soul to endure what they did. What was once seen as weakness is now seen as resilience. The tears they cried in the dark are now understood as the evidence of their humanity. The silence they maintained while being slandered is now recognized as strength. The endurance they showed in the face of rejection is now viewed as the evidence that they were never the problem, they were the proof. Proof that goodness still exists. Proof that truth can't be destroyed. Proof that even when the world turns against you, purpose still prevails. This public shift doesn't erase the pain, but it brings a new layer of healing. To finally be seen for who you truly are after being misrepresented for so long is both beautiful and heartbreaking. Beautiful because justice is beginning to bloom, but heartbreaking because of how long it was denied. It forces people to reckon with their own role, whether they were the accusers, the bystanders, or the indifferent. And this reckoning is crucial. Without it, the cycle repeats. But with it, true transformation becomes possible. Public outrage, when rooted in truth, is a powerful force. It can break down long-standing narratives. It can dismantle systems built on lies. It can elevate the voices that were once drowned out, and it can signal to others in hiding that it's safe to come forward, that they won't be ignored, that they won't be dismissed or silenced. What's emerging now is not just sympathy, it's alignment. People are no longer just saying, "I'm sorry that happened to you." They're beginning to say, "How can I stand with you?" That shift from pity to partnership is where real change begins. It creates community around the one who was once isolated. It builds protection where there was once vulnerability. It gives voice to the voiceless. This public outrage isn't just noisy, it's turning into advocacy. It's becoming action. It's holding people accountable. It's asking hard questions and demanding honest answers. It's refusing to allow another innocent person to go through the same hell while everyone watches silently. That is the power of truth. When it finally comes to light up, it awakens not just the one who was harmed, but everyone who thought they could look away. People are realizing that the narrative they were fed was carefully crafted to protect those in power. They now understand that the real threat wasn't the one being accused, but the truth that person carried. And as more individuals become aware, they begin to speak. They come out with their own stories. They confess how they knew something wasn't right but didn't have the courage to speak. They admit they were misled, manipulated, or too afraid to go against the crowd. This honesty is painful, but it's necessary, because with every confession, another layer of the light crumbles. With every new voice, the web of deception begins to collapse, and in its place, something pure begins to rise. Not a perfect picture, but a real one. One built on transparency, on humility, on accountability. One where truth is not only told but honored. The awakening that follows is not gently, it is disruptive. It disturbs comfort zones. It challenges loyalty to false leaders. It forces a reevaluation of what we call strength, goodness, and authority. But disruption is the birthplace of justice. And though the road to restoration is long, it begins with recognition. The public outrage, once scattered and confused, is beginning to form into a united front. One that no longer boasts a status. One that no longer protects reputations at the expense of truth. One that seeks restoration, not just for the innocent, but for everyone who allowed injustice to survive unchecked. Everything that has been done to you, every false accusation, every betrayal, every attack on your enemy, and none of it was wasted. You didn't deserve the mistreatment, the slander, or the isolation, but your endurance through it all speaks louder than anything your enemies could fabricate. The truth is no longer hidden. The pain you carried in silence is now becoming the testimony that will shake systems, change minds, and awaken hearts. What was meant to break you is now revealing your unshakable strength. What they did in secret is now being exposed in public. You are rising, not just because you survived but because you were never the problem to begin with. You were chosen, and that calling carries weight. They couldn't handle your light, so they tried to dim it. But your light was never powered by aim up, it was ordained by God. And now, the same people who tried to tear you down are being forced to witness your elevation. Truth is rising, justice is awakening, and the chosen ones are stepping fully into their anointed purpose with power, clarity, and divine backing. Thank you to everyone who took the time to listen, to reflect, and to stand in truth. Your presence here is not by accident. You're part of this awakening, part of this divine shift. If this message resonated with your soul, know that you are not alone. Keep standing, keep shining, and never let darkness convince you that your light doesn't matter. To the chosen ones out there, your story is not over. In fact, it's just beginning. Until next time, stay strong, stay grounded, and stay connected to your purpose. Thank you, and God bless you always.